The snow started falling exactly at 6 p.m., a perfect, glittering blanket settling over the outdoor plaza. It was the kind of aggressively cheerful scene that only a major city could pull off for Christmas fundraising. I was shivering, not just from the December cold biting through my thin velvet coat, but from sheer exhaustion. As a corporate lawyer specializing in high-net-worth estate management, Christmas Eve meant finishing the last, impossible deadlines. But tonight, I was doing penance. I was here volunteering with my firm's caroling group. We weren't singers. We were lawyers bundled up and holding collection buckets for the city youth shelter. It was performative charity, but the money was real. My partner, Richard, stood a few feet away, booming an off-key rendition of Joy to the World. My mistake, the one that had been quietly rotting my career for 2 years, was always in the back of my mind. I had mishandled the complex trust of a major client, Mr. Elias Vance. I didn't steal anything, but my oversight had allowed a substantial sum, millions potentially, to be exposed and subsequently stolen by a third party, a known criminal associate of Vance's. Vance hadn't sued me. He simply waited. He owned me. Around 8:30 p.m., the caroling officially wrapped up. We moved to a rented space the size of a small storefront near the plaza, supposedly for counting and bagging the donations. The space was temporary, sparse, rented specifically for this one night. "I'll handle the final count, guys. Go get warm," I told the group, already feeling the need to be alone. "I need to reconcile these receipts perfectly," Richard grumbled good-naturedly. "Don't be a hero, Alex. Just lock up when you're done. The key is on the hook by the door. Merry Christmas, you overworked perfectionist." They left. The silence after the cheerful chaos was immediate and heavy. The only sound was the low hum of the portable space heater and the distant sirens of the city. The storefront had thick, industrial glass windows, currently covered with cheap, stapled-up Christmas wrapping paper for privacy. It was an isolation chamber designed for counting money. I started dumping the coins and bills from the buckets onto a long folding table. That's when I saw it. Tucked underneath the green velvet collection bag that was specifically mine was a small, plain brown box. It wasn't wrapped. It looked like an ordinary shipping container, about the size of a shoebox. I frowned. It definitely hadn't been there when we started. I picked it up. It was heavy, solid. My heart gave a tight, unnatural thump. I looked around the empty room. Was it a late donation? Was it a threat? I carefully peeled back the taped lid. Inside, resting on a bed of shredded white paper, was a miniature antique music box. It was silver, intricately engraved with swirling floral patterns. It was beautiful, expensive, and completely out of place. A single, folded note was taped to the lid. My hands were shaking as I unfolded the crisp paper. The note was printed, not handwritten, which somehow made it colder. "Open the music box. Play the tune. Then call the number on the underside. I've been waiting a long time for my Christmas gift. Alex, Mr. Vay." The blood drained from my face. Mr. Vay. Elias Vance. He wasn't just waiting, he was playing. I immediately looked at my phone, checking the signal. Full bars. I looked at the door. The key was still hanging innocently on its hook. Did he lock the door after me? I dashed over, checking the heavy deadbolt. It was unlocked. I could leave, right now. But the chilling image of the music box on the table held me captive. What did he want? Fear won the battle over reason. I needed to know. I went back to the box, my fingers trembling as I found the small winding key on the back of the antique. I slowly turned it. It clicked with a precision that mocked my rising terror. I flipped the tiny lever. A high, reedy tune filled the small room. It was a distorted, eerie rendition of Silent Night. The melody was thin and somehow deeply unsettling. As the music played, I saw something else. Hidden inside the shredded paper lining was a tiny microphone, no bigger than a peppercorn, expertly wired to the music box's mechanism. It was a relay. He knew I was listening. He was listening to me. I quickly grabbed the antique, flipped it over, and saw the number printed on the velvet base. I snatched my phone and dialed the burner number, my heart pounding a frantic, internal rhythm against my ribs. Connected instantly. A smooth, cultured voice, undeniably Elias Vance's, cut through the terrible silence of the room. "Hello, Alex. Merry Christmas Eve. I trust you enjoyed the concert. And my little gift. I've always found Silent Night to be quite menacing, haven't you? Vance, what do you want? I can call the police right now." I tried to sound firm, but the tremor in my voice betrayed me. He laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "The police, please. You're in a private, temporary office, surrounded by thousands in untraceable cash, and you've just called a disconnected cell number. You have no leverage, Alex. I have the leverage. I have your reputation. I have your career. And soon, I will have your Christmas. What is the point of this game?" I whispered, glancing desperately at the locked storage room door, wondering if I could smash the windows and run. "The point is simple. The man who stole my money, that associate, he's planning to move the assets tomorrow. Christmas Day. A foolish move, but a necessary one. He's holding a flash drive. The drive contains the only key needed to liquidate the accounts. He's hiding it here, Alex. In the room with you." My blood ran cold. "What? That's impossible. This is a temporary office. A donation center. Precisely. Who would ever suspect? Now listen carefully. You have until 1 a.m. Exactly 3 hours and 25 minutes. You need to find the drive, which is cleverly concealed. If you fail, I send a package of documents to your firm's managing partner tomorrow morning. Documents detailing the depth of your incompetence and the true cause of my financial loss. Your life is over. If you succeed, I forget everything, and you get a generous Christmas bonus of your own. How is it hidden? Give me a hint." "I can't search this entire space." Vance's voice hardened. "It's hidden in something that doesn't belong. Something seasonal. Something you may have overlooked. I suggest you start looking, Alex. And remember, the music box is recording. If I hear you try to call anyone else, or if you break anything to escape, the clock moves up to 5 minutes. Happy hunting." The line went dead. I was trapped, not physically by a locked door, but by a paralyzing threat and a ticking clock. I had to find a flash drive hidden somewhere in this temporary donation center. I immediately started searching. Something that doesn't belong. Something seasonal. The wrapping paper on the windows. The plastic Christmas tree in the corner. The mountains of used toys and donated clothes piled in the storage area. I tore through the wrapping paper on the windows, realizing it was glued, not stapled, to the frames. Nothing. I moved to the pathetic plastic 4-foot Christmas tree. I started dismantling it, branch by branch. Nothing but cheap wire and plastic needles. My hands were already bleeding from the sharp plastic. I glanced at the timer on my phone. 12:45 a.m. Panic was starting to choke me. I went back to the folding tables, covered in the detritus of the caroling night. Empty coffee cups, discarded receipts, crumpled song sheets. I started sifting through the donation money, painstakingly looking for an anomaly. It was madness, but I couldn't stop. Then I saw it. On the farthest table, tucked behind a massive stack of coats destined for the shelter, was a small, cheap ceramic figurine. A snowman. It was one of those mass-produced, gaudy things that probably cost $5. It had a wide, painted smile and a little fabric scarf. It stood out because it was clean, unlike the dust-covered donations. It was too perfect. Too new. I picked it up. It felt heavier than ceramic should. My hands were shaking so violently I almost dropped it. I held it close to the light and noticed a faint, nearly invisible seam running around the snowman's midsection, hidden beneath the fabric scarf. With a cry of desperate effort, I jammed my fingernail into the seam and twisted. The top half of the snowman separated from the bottom, revealing a small, hollow cavity. And inside, nestled on a bed of blue foam, was a metallic flash drive. I snatched it out. It was ice cold. Just as I held the prize, the cheap, temporary lighting in the storefront flickered, then died, plunging the room into absolute, terrifying blackness. I could hear the high-pitched, winding sound of the music box starting to play its eerie Silent Night tune again. This time, it wasn't a warning. It was a confirmation. The snowman had a second trap. A deep, unfamiliar voice, definitely not Vance's, boomed from the darkness near the front door. "Vance says I get the bonus if I retrieve the drive myself, Alex. Don't make this difficult." I was blind. He knew the room. He was between me and the only exit. I clutched the flash drive so tightly my knuckles were white. I had the goal, but I was suddenly closer to death than I had ever been. I had to use the darkness. I had to find a way out of this festive death trap. I knew one thing: if I had the drive, I had the power. I struggled, and I survived this brutal night of Christmas Eve. The warehouse air was thick with the smell of old concrete, dust, and cheap tinsel. It was 11 p.m. on December 23rd, the night before Christmas Eve, and I felt the cold seeping right into my bones. I was volunteering at the Hope and Hearth Holiday Donation Center, an organization I'd found through a frantic online search promising last-minute chances to help the community. I was trying to outrun the crushing loneliness of a first Christmas alone, and a little physical labor seemed like a good solution. The place was enormous, a relic of the city's industrial past, located in a desolate, poorly lit district outside the main metro area. I'd been there since noon, sorting mountains of donated clothes and toys with about 15 other people. They were all quiet, focused, and unsettlingly compliant. Most of them looked exhausted, their faces hollow under the harsh fluorescent lights. The man running the show was Victor. He was massive, built like a fire hydrant, with flat, emotionless eyes and a voice that never rose above a low, gravelly monotone. He claimed to be the head of logistics. "All right, everyone, big push tonight. Trucks arrive at 1 a.m. We need to fill those pallets completely. No breaks until then," Victor announced, wiping his hands on a filthy rag. His voice echoed in the vast, empty space. As the hours dragged on, the atmosphere became less about charity and more about forced labor. No one spoke. If someone paused for water, Victor was immediately there, his shadow engulfing them, his presence an immediate, silent demand to keep working. I needed to use the restroom, but Victor had been very clear when I arrived. "Bathroom is over there. Door locked. Don't waste time." Around 11:30 p.m., I finally slipped away toward the specified door, located near the loading docks in the back. As I approached, I noticed two things that made the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. First, the door didn't have a handle. It had a heavy steel bar bolted across it, resembling a cell door more than a restroom. Second, I heard voices on the other side. Not just regular sounds. Crying. Muffled, desperate sobs. And a man's voice, not Victor's, speaking rapidly in a language I didn't recognize, laced with anger. I froze, heart hammering. I pressed my ear to the cold steel. The crying intensified, followed by a sickening thud. This wasn't a charity. This wasn't a restroom. I backed away slowly, desperately trying not to draw attention. I pretended to adjust a pile of coats. The warehouse now felt less like a place of refuge and more like a cage. Were those the people the donations were meant for, or were they prisoners? I returned to my sorting station, my hands moving automatically, but my mind was spinning. My fellow volunteers, were they trapped too? Or were they part of it? I looked at the pale, tired face of the young woman sorting toys next to me. Her eyes looked vacant. When Victor barked a command at her, she flinched visibly. I needed to know the layout. I needed to find a way out. I feigned needing a new box and slowly started a wide, cautious circuit around the periphery of the warehouse. The main entrance, a huge sliding metal bay door, was sealed shut with heavy chains and 2 large padlocks. An insurmountable obstacle. As I reached the far corner, near a stack of empty industrial bins, I saw a small window high up near the ceiling. It was covered by thick, crisscrossing metal bars. Useless for escape, but I noticed something underneath it. A small wooden door, almost completely obscured by shadows and stacked junk. I waited until Victor was on the other side of the room, loudly directing the stacking of canned goods. I slipped into the shadows behind the bins. My breath was ragged. I pushed aside a heavy canvas tarp covering the small door. It was a personnel door, designed for emergency exit, labeled with a faded red sign. I grabbed the handle and twisted. It was locked, of course. But as my hands slid across the metal, I felt something taped underneath the handle. I carefully peeled it off. It was a piece of cheap brown tape, and beneath it, written faintly in blue ink, was a single letter, C. A clue, or a deadly joke. Was this the code for a lockbox? The key to an external lock? I heard heavy footsteps approaching my location. Victor. I quickly smoothed the tarp back over the door and returned to my workstation, heart slamming against my chest. What were you doing back there? Taking a smoke break? We don't take breaks. Remember? Victor said, his face inches from mine, his breath smelling stale and metallic. And no, just looking for another empty box. This pile is sorted, I stammered, pointing to the neatly stacked clothing. He stared at me for a long, unsettling moment. Get back to work, and don't wander off again. We don't like wanderers. I knew I was being watched now. The tension was electric. I couldn't afford another mistake. I kept thinking about that C. I went back to sorting the clothes, but now I was searching with a terrifying new purpose. The donations. Something useful. Something with a C. My hands passed over sweaters, hats, and scarves. Then I found it. A child's backpack, bright blue, sitting slightly apart from the other toys. It was embroidered with a single common name in bold yellow thread. Chloe. I reached inside the backpack. It contained only a handful of papers and a small silver item wrapped in tissue paper. I slipped the item out, hiding it in the palm of my hand. It was a cheap, decorative silver key, the kind used for small diaries or padlocks. Not a high-security key. But it was the only key I had. I had the C and the key. Was this the key to the exit door? I risked one look at my phone. 12:35 a.m. The trucks were coming in 25 minutes. If I was still here when the trucks arrived, I suspected I would be on one of them, heading to an unknown location and an unimaginable future. I had to move. Now, I waited until Victor was occupied near the loading bay doors, directing one of the hollow-eyed workers. I slipped back into the shadows near the emergency door. My hands were slick with cold sweat. I fumbled with the tiny key, my entire body shaking. The key didn't fit the main lock on the emergency door. I sank against the wall, despair washing over me. I was wrong. I was caught. But then, my fingers brushed against a tiny, almost invisible padlock attached to a simple metal hasp above the main door handle. It was securing a small, heavy chain that kept the door from being fully unlatched. It was the size of a child's jewelry box lock. I carefully inserted the tiny silver key, turned with a satisfying, soft click. I pulled the hasp open and dropped the key and the tiny padlock into my pocket. The primary lock on the door was still sealed, but I realized the door was an emergency exit. There must be an internal release mechanism. I looked closely at the door frame. Yes, near the top, disguised by the shadow, was a small, green button marked Push TO Exit. It was disabled, but the wiring was exposed. I heard footsteps approaching from the main floor. Victor was coming back. I had maybe 10 seconds. I grabbed a discarded piece of metal wire I'd noticed earlier, used for tying down boxes. I jammed the wire into the exposed section of the wiring near the button, trying to complete the circuit. Nothing. The footsteps were closer. I closed my eyes, picturing the diagram I'd seen on an alarm panel once. Red wire to green wire. I tried crossing the contacts again, jamming the metal hard against the cold, fragile wires. A faint, high-pitched whine echoed from the door. The primary lock clunked open, the sound muffled by the thick steel. I ripped the wire out. Victor rounded the corner of the bins. "I thought I told you not to wander, girl." His voice was low and menacing. I didn't answer. I slammed my palm against the now active green Push TO Exit button. The door burst outward with a loud clang, revealing a narrow, snowy alleyway. Victor let out a roar of rage and lunged at me. I ducked under his huge arm, stumbling out into the blinding snow and the freezing night air. The metallic tang of fear was overwhelming. I scrambled to my feet, hearing the warehouse door crash back shut behind me. I didn't look back. I ran, the rough concrete scraping my knees, sprinting down the dark, garbage-strewn alley. The sirens of the approaching trucks, undoubtedly the ones Victor was waiting for, were growing louder in the distance. I burst out onto the main road, a desolate industrial stretch of asphalt. I kept running, fueled by pure, desperate terror. Finally, I saw it. A single weak neon sign in the distance. A gas station. Civilization. Safety. I didn't stop until I reached the brightly lit pavement. I collapsed against a pump, dialing 911, the snowman key still digging into my palm. The charity wasn't about hope or hearth. It was a trap, and I had just escaped it by the narrowest of margins. I had survived the grim, false benevolence of a Christmas lie. The snow was coming down in thick, blinding sheets, transforming the quiet suburban street into a desolate, white landscape. It was 1:15 a.m. on December 24th, Christmas Eve. I hadn't wanted to be out. My elderly neighbor, Mrs. Albright, had run out of a critical heart medication, and her son was stuck out of town. The perennial Good Samaritan, was her last resort. My own holiday plans had been put on hold for this emergency run. The only place open was a 24-hour megapharmacy 5 miles away, an imposing, brightly lit block of cheap consumer goods and pharmaceutical secrets. As I pulled into the nearly empty parking lot, the wind howled, rattling the oversized plastic holiday banners strung across the facade. The entire store seemed deserted, save for a single car parked way out near the edge of the lot. I entered the store. The heat inside was stifling, almost sickly sweet, smelling of sterile plastic and cheap holiday candy. There was no music, no festive cheer, just the high, annoying hum of the fluorescent lights. The front aisles were empty. No shoppers, no security guard. I walked back toward the pharmacy counter, which was tucked into the rear corner. Behind the counter stood a man in a white pharmacist's coat, though he looked far too young and far too anxious to be a licensed professional. His name tag simply read, Mike, Pharmacy Technician. "Hi, I'm here to pick up an emergency refill for Mrs. Albright." "Eleanor Albright," I said, trying to sound calm and professional. "Yes, right. Her file is here," Mike replied, his eyes darting quickly toward the ceiling and back. He didn't meet my gaze. His hands, when they appeared on the counter, were trembling slightly. "It's $210. It's a special compound." I pulled out my wallet. "No problem, but she usually calls in and pays through her insurance." "Did you process the claim?" Mike swallowed hard. "The system is having a terrible time. Power flickers from the storm, Crashed right as I was trying to run her card. We're only accepting cash right now. Or, if you have her card, I could try to input it manually later. But the machine keeps requiring a full written security override code. It's a mess." His explanation was too long, too detailed. The air felt thin and cold, despite the heat. "Okay, I'll pay cash, but about that override code." "I'm confused. Why would your cash machine need a security code?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. Mike froze. He kept his head down, fiddling with a pen. It's a new corporate policy for after-hours emergency pickups to prevent fraud." He finally looked up, and I saw it. His eyes were wide with fear, and beneath the thin layer of anxiety, I recognized something colder. He wasn't afraid of me, he was afraid of something else. He pushed a small, plain white receipt slip across the counter. It wasn't a receipt. Scrawled in tiny, panicked handwriting were 3 words. "Do not pay." My blood went cold. I snatched the paper and crushed it in my palm. I leaned forward, dropping my voice to a whisper. "What is happening? Who is doing this to you?" Mike's eyes flicked past my shoulder. A different man, large and heavily built, wearing the dark blue uniform of a store stalker, slowly walked around the aisle end. He wasn't stocking anything. He was just watching. "I'm sorry, I need you to step back, ma'am," Mike suddenly said, his voice loud and artificially firm. He pointed to a small printed sign I hadn't noticed before. "Only authorized personnel passed this line." The stalker moved closer, slowly pushing a heavy cleaning cart, which somehow managed to block the entire main aisle leading back to the entrance. I was trapped in the pharmacy section. "I need that heart medication now," I insisted, maintaining the facade of a demanding customer. My mind was racing. They weren't after the cash. They were after something specific, and they were using this elaborate scam to keep me here, isolated. Was Mike being held hostage? Was this a targeted drug theft? "You see, ma'am, about that override code. You must have a relative who works here, correct? Perhaps a manager who might know the access sequence." "I can't finish the transaction without it," Mike insisted, parroting a phrase that clearly wasn't his own. I understood. They thought I was the target, not the random customer. They thought I had a connection to the store's deep-level security. My pulse hammered in my ears. I was just an ordinary neighbor running an errand, but someone had made a terrible mistake. I immediately thought of my cousin, David. He was the assistant district manager for this entire chain. Did they think I was him, or that I was bringing him the key or the code? No manager connection. "Look, I need the pills now, or I'm calling the police about this fraudulent behavior." I lied, pulling out my phone. The stalker immediately abandoned his cart and started walking toward the counter. Mike's eyes pleaded with me. "If you call, she dies," Mike whispered, so low I barely heard it. "She, Mrs. Albright." They had followed me. They knew who I was picking up the medication for. The threat was real and immediate. I slowly put my phone down. "Fine." "No call. What do you want?" "I don't know any code, but I'll do anything to get Mrs. Albright her medicine." The stalker reached the counter, his massive shadow falling over Mike. "Enough. You know the code, Sarah. David sent you. We know the deal. Give us the night's safe combination, or the old woman gets a visit from my friend." The stalker snarled. His voice was rough, uneducated. He was definitely the muscle. They had me confused with someone named Sarah. and they had David's safe combination as their goal. I am not Sarah. I am just a neighbor. I don't know any David or any safe combination, I said, trying to inject genuine disbelief into my tone. The stalker reached under the counter and pulled out a long, dark object. A lead pipe. Wrong answer. Now, you have 2 minutes to remember that combination, or we make this messy. I looked desperately at Mike. He was white as a sheet, clearly terrified for his own life. I realized my only chance was to cause maximum high-volume chaos. They were relying on the silence and the storm to cover their operation. I needed sound and light. I slowly backed away from the counter, my eyes scanning the aisles. I saw the emergency light switch for the front window display, located near the cosmetics section. It was designed to stay illuminated even during a power outage. Okay, I need a moment. The combination is difficult. It starts with a 4, and then a letter. I think. I stalled, taking 2 steps toward the cosmetics. Stop talking and move, the stalker ordered. I kept backing up. I just need a piece of paper. I can write it down. It's a long sequence. The stalker, impatient, started to move around the counter. Mike watched me, his terror now mixed with a spark of frantic hope. When the stalker cleared the end of the counter, giving me a clear sight line to the cosmetics aisle, I turned and ran. Not toward the exit, but toward the seasonal display built near the front window. I grabbed a large, flimsy display rack loaded with ceramic Christmas mugs and cheaply wrapped candy boxes. I put my shoulder into it and shoved the entire unit toward the aisle. The rack crashed with a magnificent, shattering noise. Glass smashed, ceramic chipped, and a cascade of plastic-wrapped candy bounced everywhere. The stalker shouted in fury and stumbled over the debris. The noise was deafening, amplified by the silent store. I didn't stop. I reached the cosmetics aisle and slammed my fist against the large, exposed exit button for the automatic front doors. Nothing happened. They had been manually overridden. But right next to the door panel, there was a small fire alarm box. I didn't hesitate. I smashed the thin glass cover with my elbow, ignoring the sharp sting of pain, and pulled the lever down. The blaring, deafening shriek of the fire alarm instantly filled the huge store, an ear-splitting sonic wave of pure panic. The lights in the pharmacy section flickered and died, plunged into the deep darkness of the city's power grid during a storm. Only the bright, independent emergency lights in the ceiling stayed on. The chaos was immediate. The stalker roared in frustration from the back. I ran to the nearest wall, searching for another exit. I found a small, unmarked steel door, partially obscured by a rack of discounted vitamin supplements. It had a simple crash bar. I slammed my weight against it. The bar gave. I burst out into a small, unheated storage hallway. I heard the heavy, angry footsteps of the stalker crashing through the debris of the candy aisle behind me. I ran down the storage hall, kicking open the final door, and found myself in the back alley, shielded from the road by massive dumpsters. The cold wind hit me like a physical blow. I didn't care. I had traded silence for noise, light for darkness, and enclosure for the bitter, free expanse of the alleyway. I scrambled over a low fence and ran back toward the empty parking lot, my car now my only beacon of hope. The fire alarm was still wailing, cutting through the storm. Someone somewhere would hear that. I reached my car, fumbled the key into the ignition, and sped out of the lot, leaving the brightly lit, screaming prison behind me. I had escaped the Christmas Eve trap, but I knew the fake technician and the stalker would not be far behind. I gripped the steering wheel, racing toward the nearest police station, hoping Mike and Mrs. Albright were safe from their terror.